Hello, my name is Kelly.
And I'm McCarty.
This is Historical Tea with the Twins. It's my turn, and we're going to do the Radium Girls, which is super fascinating. There's a book called The Radium Girls by Kate Moore, I think it's her name, and that's where I got most of this information. It's really well written. It's a little bit long, but it's really well written. Okay. So, in kind of like in the 19 teens during World War I, around that time period, is when this is kind of all starting. And these two, well, no, it was a bunch of places. Madame Curie found radium. Like, she discovered the element radium. And then, like, 20 years later, in, like, during World War II, in that time period, they were like, oh my god, radium is the coolest thing ever.
Did she find it, like, was she out there? I guess I don't know where radium comes from. Was she out there digging?
It's an element.
I know, but, like, was she out there digging for it, or?
I don't know how they discovered it. I don't know any of that, but, they're like, but you know what's so funny? And I think this is right, I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is correct. Her husband, Peter, or Philip, or something, he's not important. I think he got a Nobel Prize for it, but she didn't, even though she did all the work.
That never happens.
I don't know if that's true, but that seems right. Anyway, so the radium, they were using radium, and they're like, this is a wonder drug, because I think that they had discovered...
It's not a drug, though.
It was then.
Oh.
They had discovered that, like, it could treat cancer, which is what we use radium for. Like, we use radiation for cancer. I don't know if it's the same thing as radium. Either way, they're like, hey, this works on cancer. And so then they were like, this is the greatest thing to ever live. The greatest thing to ever happen. We found this thing, and it is, they made it in toothpaste, they put it in drinks, in tonics, they put it in cosmetics. It was kind of like this wonder drug, and they're like, it will make your life longer.
Did they have, like, why did they think it would make their life longer?
I don't know. They thought that it was the next thing, like the greatest thing to ever happen. So they start using it.
It's another thing where they don't have literally any proof or anything anecdotal. They
any scientific. They're like, yeah, it can't be bad for you. Like, it was basically the greatest thing ever. So during World War II, a bunch of companies came out with glow-in-the-dark paint, and they used that on watches and, like, military dials because it glowed in the dark, and they could use it for watches and stuff so people could see it in the dark. Anyway, it had some other... the paint had some other military uses, but mostly they were making dials and watches. So let's see. So they obviously didn't know that much about it, but they thought that it was like the greatest thing since sliced bread. And even like it was such a craze that people were like coming up with other, like, new products that didn't have radium in it, but they advertised it as having radium.
So they were lying?
Yeah, they were super lying because radium was very, very, very expensive. Like, in the book it tells you how expensive it is, but I can't remember what it was. But it's very expensive, and most people can't afford it, so they would, like, lie about their products.
That's so funny.
Yeah. So the biggest two factories, there was a couple factories that was doing this, but the biggest two that they talk about in the book is Radium Luminous Material Corps, which later turned into U.S. Radium Corps, and then that was in Orange, New Jersey, and the other one was the Radium Dial Company, and that was in Ottawa, Illinois.
Okay.
So, because of the war, World War I, they needed a lot of dials, they needed a lot of watches, they needed a lot of stuff. So there was this huge push to get a bunch of people to be hired for this job. A bunch of people wanted this job, and they made buku bucks. Like, the girls who worked in this job were making good money.
And this is all before they know what radium does to you.
Yeah, they don't know what radium is. I mean, they know what it is, but it's not well researched. They don't know.
Has Madame Curie died yet?
I don't know.
Because doesn't she die of radium poisoning?
Yeah. I don't know where she's at in this, but they discovered radium like 20 years prior to this point. So, like, in the late 1890s, early 1900s. So the girls are making crazy amounts of money, and they make it piecemeal, or they get money piecemeal. So however many dials that they paint, they make money on each dial. Okay. So the more they're painting, the more money they make. So one of the ways that they one of the biggest ways that they painted, they would use these really fine camel hair brushes, super, super fine, and they would put it in their lips to point. It was called lip pointing. So they'd put it in their lips to make a really nice point. I think they would dip it, they would lick it and then dip it in the paint and then paint and then point it again, dip it in the paint and then paint the dials. So they were like ingesting this stuff. And they were told multiple times that this was very safe. Like, this is a wonder drug. There's nothing that can harm you. Everything is perfectly fine.
And I also remember something, because I read the book too, something about, like, some people try not, or some of the girls try not to do it, but they just weren't as fast. And so then they weren't making as much money. So then they ultimately, like, caved and
went
started
back to
doing
the lip pointing. So a lot of the girls were like, ew, that tastes disgusting. It's gritty. I don't like how it feels in my mouth. So they would try not to lip paint. But the best way to keep it nice and neat and to paint the fastest was the lip pointing. So early on, there was this, I think
part of it was too, like, they didn't want to waste brushes.
Yeah.
Like camel hair.
Well, that,
right.
It didn't really say too much about that, but they couldn't wipe off the brushes because the paint, they were wasting too much material.
That's right.
So they didn't want them to, like, clean the brushes in between in between dials because it would waste products. So the lip pointing was a technique that they
wasted less,
yes. So at one point early on, when they're still saying that this is like a wonder drug, I think he was like the president of the company or something like that, saw a girl lip painting and said, don't do that, you'll get sick. And then she asked her, like, supervisors, and she goes, like, that's what he said. And she goes, no, this is a safe product. It's going to be fine. So many, many hundreds, maybe thousands, I'm not sure, of girls were hired. I think the youngest one they said was like 11.
And all of these are like, or most of these are like unmarried.
Yeah, they're all teenagers basically. So between like 13, 14, I think they said that one of the oldest ones was 28, and she was a rarity because she was a spinster, basically.
Actually, that's too old to be a spinster.
I know. So she was like basically the oldest one. So they all ranged in age from like, the youngest one was 11, the oldest was 28.
Now all I can think about is I'm 27 years old. I have
no money and no prospects. I'm already a burden to my family. 2007 or 2005 Pride and Prejudice.
What wonderful boiled potatoes.
Yes, I love that movie so much. Anyway, so the girls would like recruit their friends. They'd be like, this is the best job ever. We get paid so much. We are hot shit. Like, these girls, like, the paint made them glow. So they would wear their best dresses.
So they could get splattered with paint.
They'd wear their best dresses, and it was a powder that they would use, like, mix in water or something to make it a paint, but it was powder, so it would cling to their clothes, and then they would paint it on their lips, on their teeth, in their hair, their eyebrows. They would, like, paint it on their bodies to look cool, and then they would go out on the town that night, and they called them the Ghost Girls because they glowed. So they were doing this. They were, like, all just living the dream, like living their unmarried bachelor lives.
Let's imagine girls nowadays putting like arsenic.
Yeah.
And just like,
I think it's worse than arsenic.
I know it is worse than arsenic, but I'm just thinking of like, I'm trying to think of like an equivalent.
Yeah.
To doing that, but I guess if we find out one of the hot makeup items is covered in, that's kind of the same, except for it's not meant to be worn on your body.
Well, and very few people had access to this product because it was so expensive. So the girls were like the coolest people in town, and they were just living their lives. They were painting, and then eventually like a girl would get married, and so she'd leave the job, and then
there'd be like fights for other girls to come in.
Yeah, they really wanted this job because it was they paid really, really well, and it was like fairly easy work compared to factory work. Like, I mean, this was a factory, but comparatively it was easy money. So a few years after, like, this was maybe in like the late teens, early 20s, and I don't remember who the first girl was. I think her name might have been Maggie. She starts having pains. She's like, my jaw really hurts. My bones hurt.
How long has she been working there?
I I don't know how long she'd been working there, but she had left. And this was like a few years later. Or like she'd been working there a few years. It takes a few years. So she goes into a dentist and she goes, my tooth really hurts. I don't know what's going on, but my tooth hurts. So he looks in her mouth and her tooth is dead. So he extracts the tooth and then sends her on her merry way. And she comes back later and it still hasn't healed and another tooth needs removed. So they take that tooth out and then he takes out at some point he takes out a tooth and a piece of her jaw comes with it.
That happened to us once with the dog.
Ew. So her jaw was basically disintegrating and she had ulcers and pus and like wounds and dead teeth and like she was very self-conscious about her breath because everything was dead inside of her body.
Everything was rotting away.
So then she eventually like she passes away. And then this is happening in
fairly young though, right?
Yeah, they're all in their early 20s. Early to mid 20s when they
die.
Pass away. So this is happening in Orange, New Jersey, and in Illinois, Ottawa, Illinois. I think there was one other place, but I don't remember where it was. So they're kind of like dominoes. The girls start getting various ailments. One of them, her legs are really bothering her, and like her hips aren't working. So at one point, she's in a cast from like here to her knees. She's in a plaster cast because her legs, just to see if it would like help her body, because her bones and all of them had rheumatism, and their joints were hurting.
Rheumatism is real.
Yes,
but it's also one of those.
None of them actually had rheumatism.
Yeah, it's also one of those conditions where they're like, before they knew it was tuberculosis, it's like, oh, she has consumption.
Yeah,
or like, oh, she has.
It was kind of a catch-all
for anything
illness.
Yeah.
So they all have.
It's kind of like how everything today you're sick because of inflammation, so you have to do an inflammation diet.
Yeah. Everything is like, one by one these girls are falling, but they go to the doctor and they all have slightly different symptoms. Like one girl, her leg, she started limping and then her leg was like, she's like, I think one leg is shorter than the other. Like by 4 centimeters or something.
But that's a lot.
Like towards the end of her life, her leg was like 4 centimeters smaller than the other one.
That's almost over an inch.
Yeah. So they're like, one by one, these girls are just falling and they're getting treatment at different places and they're getting treatment at different times. And they all have slightly different diseases, slightly different symptoms. So the first doctor that saw the first gal, who's, I'm sorry, I don't remember her name, because there's so many girls. He is like, I wonder, he's like, this kind of looks like Fosse jaw, which Fosse jaw was where your jaw would disintegrate if you handled phosphorus. So he asks her, he goes, hey, do you handle phosphorus in your job? And she goes, no, I'm a radium dial painter. Like, we don't have phosphorus. And so he asks the company if they could give him the recipe for the paint. And he looks at the recipe and he goes, well, it's not phoscium, so it can't be Fosse jaw. So then, like, years go by.
Phosphorus, not phoscium.
What did I said phosphorus.
Right now you just said phoscium for
whatever. Phosphorus. And so then the girls decided, or one of the doctors or someone decides, I want to see, like, I think this is work related. I think that they should be compensated for this. I think what they're doing is unhealthy. I think their job is killing them. So they go to the company and they're like, hey, we need to do like an internal.
Just the dentist? Has the dentist gone on to interact with other people?
The dentist helps a lot of the girls because a lot of it starts out with jaw pain and tooth pain. And he was like
Makes sense because they're putting it in their mouth.
Yeah, he was a big advocate for the girls. But then I think he turns on them at the end.
That would make sense.
I don't know if that's correct, but I think I read that last night. So they are like, hey, they go to the bosses. Multiple girls at multiple different times go to the bosses of the two companies and they're like, hey, is this bad for us? Like, are we okay doing this?
Like, are we sure this is safe?
Yeah, is this safe? And they're like, yeah, this is a wonder drug. This is, if anything, you're going to live longer because you're around radium all the time. So, because they were saying, the way that they thought was that because the girls are around such infinitesimal amounts of radium that it couldn't
It couldn't be.
It couldn't be dangerous.
At this time, did they know it was dangerous in large quantities? Or had they started to suspect?
I think they had started to suspect something was awry because one of the doctors who worked with, who made the paint or, worked with the radium to make the paint, he had to cut the tip of his finger off because the radium burned a hole in his finger. Like, a lot of the men who were working on the phosphorus, or on the radium, were wearing protection at those factories. But they thought so the men were getting protection, they were taking precautions. The women were like, no, you're barely touching it. It can't be.
Well, and then that is more likely that the supervisors and floor people, correct? Or is it, the people? So my guess is it's the production people who are like, well, no, that's the only way to get them to do it faster is to lick it. So we're going to tell them it's safe. Or is it just the whole company is?
Well, that one dude told her not to lick it. Basically, they didn't have, even when they were so there was a test, some outside person conducted a study, and he was like, this is maybe not great. But they wouldn't publish that study, and then they did implement some changes where they were like, hey, don't put that in your mouth anymore. And they tried to come up with other solutions to do it, but none of them were as fast or efficient, so they went back to lip pointing. But even if they hadn't been putting it in their mouths, ingesting it, they were still breathing it. They were still, yeah. But the company thought that because it was such small amounts that there was no way that it could harm them because they were getting minute.
But if you get a little bit over time, if you're doing it every day and putting it in your mouth, it's gonna do damage. Right. Even that's why radiologists stand behind the wall, because even little bits, they're not gonna harm you if you do it once, but if you do it every single day. That's as someone who did x-rays every single day for 3 years.
So the girls, one by one, just start getting sick. And they're trying to get, by 1925, I think. So they did quite a few studies, and people were like, no, this is dangerous. And the companies were like, well, we're not going to tell them because they don't need to know. So they would kind of bury these because they weren't.
Aren't you glad things like that don't happen today?
The girls weren't subscribed to these medical journals or these technology journals or whatever kind of journals they were in. So they weren't getting the information firsthand.
And it wasn't in bigger publications.
Yeah. So they just kept burying it, saying everything was fine. And then eventually some of the girls, there was one girl who was in charge of divvying out the powder to give to the girls to paint. She would tie a scarf around her face so she wouldn't ingest it, but I don't think she knew definitively that it was bad for her.
She probably just knew, oh, this is a dust.
Yeah. So then in 1925, let's see. They were saying that the illnesses were just a coincidence, and since most of the girls had stopped working there at that point, because it took so long for the symptoms to actually show up, sometimes years.
Do you know an average length of time?
It depended on the girl, because some of them,
how long they worked there.
Yeah, so some of them got symptoms 3 to 5 years after they quit. So because the company was saying that because they got the symptoms after they quit, there was no way it could be from the factory.
Sure.
So the girls are trying to find legal representation because their medical bills are stacking up. And the first doctor that helped him, the first dentist, Dr. Kniff, I think was maybe his name, and he was trying to help the girls as much as he could financially.
That was our janitor.
I know, right? He was trying to do things for free and not charge as much, but he was in the hole at this point too.
Even just them spending money, they're also most likely not able to work. So they're not only losing money that they have, but they're the loss of income.
Well, at this point they had families. So the girls were married. A lot of them had kids. One of them tried for a long time. I think she tried for I think her name was Adeline or something. She tried for 4 years to have kids, and then finally she got pregnant, and it was stillborn. And I felt so bad for her. But then she started going downhill, and her symptoms kind of caught up with her. So then I think in 1925, a doctor came up with a test that definitively can tell you if radium is in your system. So, and it definitively says radium is dangerous. It's causing their illness. These girls have, it was some kind of test where they would breathe into a tube and then science would happen and then it would tell you if they had radium in their body. And apparently radium ingested causes much more symptoms and works a lot faster
than contact.
Than outside contact. So because they were ingesting the radium, it was working at a faster rate and it was destroying their body. Basically, from what I understand, radium sucks the calcium out of your bones. So basically their bones were disintegrating from the inside out.
Which would make sense why that girl lost 4 centimeters.
Yeah. And then there was one girl who passed away and the doctor who discovered that method to test the body, he first discovered a method to test radium, but you had to be deceased because they would burn your bones, and that's how they would discover how much radium was in your body. So then he was like working really hard because he was noticing all of these girls. He was trying to help them. And
before death.
Yeah, before they died. So he came up with a way to test if they had radium poisoning. Because the whole thing was the companies were like, no, they can't have radium poison. If they do have radium poisoning, they didn't get it here. It didn't come from here because they got it after they quit. Because most of the girls had no longer been working there. And there was this...
They found the radium somewhere else.
Yeah.
Even though it's really expensive and hard to find.
Yeah. So there was a compensation type thing for factory workers. Like, if you got certain illnesses, you could be compensated. But there was only 9 materials that were on that list. And you had to develop symptoms within 5 months. You only had a 5-month period where you could sue or get compensation. But most of these girls... their symptoms happened way later. And then I think federally you had 2 years from the time to sue. So some of the girls did get to sue. Some of them settled outside of court. Which helped a little bit with like their doctor bills, but all of the girls ended up dying anyway. Like
young.
Yeah, they all died young. In their mid to late 20s. Some of them got a lawyer. And then in 1932, one of the girls successfully sued the company. I don't remember which dial company it was, but they successfully sued the company. And this case made like headlines and it led to safety reforms for factories and it helped create OSHA.
Oh.
So the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. This case was one that kind of was like, yeah, we really need more protection for factory workers and we need to help these girls. But if you Google the Radium Girls, there's also a movie with Joey King, but I never saw it. If you Google it, you can see pictures or drawings of like girls who
just like have no jaws.
The one girl, I think her name was Margaret, her jaw just fell off. Like, or they would get these huge, their jaws would swell. They would get so much fluid in their jaws that it would just be like huge
goiters.
Yeah, basically.
What is a goiter?
I don't know. But they were very, like, all of the girls were very, very sick they would be sick for years and in so much pain, and then everyone would just kind of be like, nobody put the pieces together for so long.
Or if they did, they buried it.
Or they buried it, yeah. So they had like they all had slightly different symptoms, so no one put 2 and 2 together. And then eventually, I think it was the doctor that created that test. One of the girls sat down, and she told him every name she could remember of girls who worked there, girls who had been sick. Like he had a list of like he wrote them all down, and they had a list of like maybe 100 names. And whenever he would hear that one of them passed away, he would write a D next to their name. I know. So he kept track, and it's just really sad because all of these women thought they were doing this, they had this great job, and like at first they didn't know, but eventually they did know what was going on, and they just never told anyone. They just never told the girls. They're like, well, it doesn't matter. But one guy who worked at the factory that like, because there was like a lab that extracted the radium or did whatever, and then the girls that painted, and one guy, like a bunch of them lost fingers and stuff from handling the radium, and they had like protective gear and stuff, but one guy died from the same symptoms that the girls had. when he was like 39. But for the most part, it was all of the girls who died, and there was a bunch of them. I'm rereading the book again because I read it a while ago, so I'm rereading it. But I'm not done with it yet. But
Because she's a slow reader.
no, because I keep falling asleep.
That's what you told me last week.
No, it's really sad though. It's a very interesting read, and I encourage everyone to read it. It's just pretty interesting, but yeah, it's pretty sad. The girls, most of them died, and most of them died where their family would have hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And like back in the day, it would have been like $8,000, but in our money, it was like $100,000. So even the ones that did get a little bit of money from settlements, it wasn't enough. Most of their families ended up terribly, terribly in debt because of everything. So this one's kind of a shorter one, but it's still, I think it's really interesting. I think the poor girls.
I know, it's kind of like those commercials you see, like, if you have mesothelioma,
Yeah.
for working in asbestos.
Yeah,
It's very similar to asbestos. Because they used it in everything.
Yeah.
And then they discover later that it's
Mhm.
bad, and everyone has mesothelioma.
It's really, like, I'm reading the book, and the narrator, well, I'm listening to it because audiobooks. I'm listening to it, and the narrator just keeps saying the name, and then she'll be like, well, she suffered, and then she died. And then she suffered, and she died. And it was like everybody keeps dying, and it's really sad.
But if it makes you feel better, they would have been dead anyways.
I know.
Because time.
But, yeah. That's all I have. It's
And
pretty grim.
Nobody survived?
I don't think so. There are some that, like, maybe weren't working there for as long and got out quicker, that maybe lived a little bit longer. But I think for the most part, they all died pretty young. I know. It's really sad.
Yeah. Well,
do you have anything else that you'd like to talk about?
no. It is interesting thinking about the asbestos, too. Like, I think about that. Never connected those two. I mean, they're not super connected, but, like, asbestos is also
A wonder material.
yeah. But also highly problematic and deadly.
Dangerous.
So.
But, yeah.
Also, did you know it's like a rock?
Asbestos?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a mineral or something, right?
Yeah, that's insane to me.
Well, I think radium is too. Radium is an element, but I don't know what it looks like or where it comes from. But there's different types of radium too, and some radium is more dangerous than others.
Do you think they knew they were different?
Yeah, they had a couple different radiums. It's something about like the radiation rays or whatever. Like there's alpha rays that are really short and can be blocked by like a piece of paper. In radium, they have 3 different. There's beta rays, maybe is the other one, and those ones can be blocked by lead. And then there's the gamma rays that are the most dangerous, or something like that.
So the gamma rays, or whichever the ones that block by lead, those are like the X-rays that we take now.
The gamma rays are what turned the Hulk into the Hulk. Yeah, I think. I only saw that movie once.
How come his shirt pulled off and his pants don't?
Because modesty. Maybe his thighs don't get as big. I don't know.
Just saying.
Well,
Mark Ruffalo, if you can tell us.
I feel like that in the one movie where he falls out of the sky thing, he loses his pants when that old farmer finds him.
But isn't that more from, like, the altitude that he fell from? Because, like, in Twilight, Jacob has to take all of his clothes off before. Why doesn't not Bruce Wayne, what's his name?
Bruce Banner.
Why doesn't he take all his clothes off before he hulks out? And then carry him in a little backpack?
Jacob wears pants in the movie.
But in the books he has to go run away and be naked. Anyway.
I don't know how it works. It's science.
The science do be sciencing.
Stupid. All right. Anything you have?
No, next week I'm going to do the Black Plague. And so, yeah, which is awesome because I already have a whole, I think it's like 15 pages that I've already done all the research for because that was my senior thesis in college. So
nice.
I'm debating if I want to read Philip Ziegler's book again or if I just want to go based on this stuff every day.
Is it short?
No.
Oh. Well, that's all I have.
So I
Sorry, this one's a little bit shorter than normal, but...
No, it's like the same length.
Oh, well, I can't see that far away. All right, well, like and subscribe and do all the things. Share this with your friends. And
If you don't want to, that's fine too.
Yeah, do whatever you want. Once we hit upload, we don't really care what happens. So, all right. Well, you guys have a great day.
Bye.